Hello! Today I thought we could paint bluebells. Bluebell woods would be lovely. They're absolutely stunning at the moment, and because of lockdown we can't all access the woods. I have been lucky to be able to do that when I take my dog for a walk. Those of you may have bluebells in your garden you can paint. But I'm going to first clean my palette. It's a bit grubby. In order to have a fresh watercolour painting, it's a good idea just to take some of the excess paint off with a kitchen roll. I've got two palettes here, one slides inside the other, which is quite handy. Still mucky. Let's get some more. Okay, and then these are a bit dirty here. Might need that one. Okay, I'm going to choose three primary colours: cobalt blue, Windsor lemon and quinacridone magenta. If you haven't got all these, then quinacridone magenta, you've probably got permanent rose. Cobalt blue is a pretty good colour to keep in your palette, and Windsor lemon could be lemon yellow. It's a very, you're going to try and get the transparent lemon, but that's going to give you some nice spring-like greens, some lime greens when you mix them with the blues, with the cobalt blue. And then all I do is just fill up my palette with the tubes. So I've got nice soft paint. They do dry overnight, so it's a good idea before you start just to throw some water into your colour pans, and that softens up your paint. Not that I'm going to use them all, but they'll soon dry. There's a slight breeze today, quite a cool breeze. Okay, first off, with a very wet brush, this is a Hake type brush, I'm going to lay in all the pale, although this isn't so pale, it's going to dry 30% lighter, the colours of the woods. I'm going to come in with the blue, some of the bluebells, very rough and loose at this stage. And of course the blue will mix with the green in places to give you the green. So add more water if you want to. It'll all run off the page. This page hasn't been stretched. In fact, it's handmade paper, so it's ever so thick, but it will bow and the pigment will run to the edge. It's a good idea as you go just to police the edge of this paper so you don't get any back runs. So now I'm going to pick up cobalt blue, put in a bit more cobalt blue, and I'm going to pick up magenta, quinacridone magenta, so that some of the foreground bluebells are a lot warmer than the background, and you'll see that that'll bring them forward. At the moment there's a bit of a carpet going on, no particular definition, and when you put in some of these lovely limey colours, yellow, you'll get this lovely mix going on. There's a bit of a path coming on down the middle, so let's take it to the right and off to the right here somewhere. It's always nice to have a path that gives you a bit of a focal point, draws you into the woods. So mixing your purples, mixing your greens with those first primary colours. Now if I was to mix my quinacridone magenta with my cobalt blue, I will get the purple. Then if I add my yellow, I will get some nice browns. So let's put in tree. So it's all very wet. I like to keep it loose to start with. So you do lose control a little. If you prefer, you can wait for the first layer to dry. Before adding more defined tones. As the trees go back, I make them a bit paler, a bit more purpley, so that you cool the browns down. Which you don't really, not really brown anymore, but they still need to get recession into this woodland to make you, or the viewer, draw you in. Walk through the bluebells. I'm going to pick up in fact it's a tongue depressor that's been sharpened. You can use a lolly stick, good excuse to have a lolly. And I guess a tongue depressor is very topical at the moment with the coronavirus issues. Let's put a bit more lemon in here. And of course when you're going through a woodland you see this canopy coming across. It's just magical. And you can hear the bees at this time of year just going about their business, just this constant hum in the background. Let's put a little yellow down here, because of course you've got the greens going on for the bluebell leaves. And you can see it's taking shape. The first layer isn't even dry yet. Okay, I'm going to come back now in with my tongue depressor that I was talking about a minute ago. It's been sharpened off so that I can pick up some pigment. So you make a little well of pigment. And I'm going to scratch in some lines. So getting the feeling of these bluebells. I'm going to have to pin this paper down a bit harder because it's buckling up and moving everywhere. Not terribly helpful. I don't mind a few splatters as well at this stage, you know, splatter it on. Take some of the excess off the brush. You can do this by putting the hilt of the brush onto the paper, kitchen roll, and that means you've just got a damp pigment at the front. So I'm going to put in some bluebells on top of those first layers. Now the first layers are still wet. They're drying, but they're still wet, but I'm not adding water, I'm adding pigment, which means that they soften the marks you're making now, softening my bluebells, allowing them to run a bit, but not losing complete control, and hopefully not going to have too many cauliflowers in this one. I hope not anyway. Can't be doing with a cauliflower in the middle of a bluebell wood. But I just love the scent, the dreaminess, and you can be in the woods with nature and the world seems far away at that time. You know, the world seems far away now. The more involved you get into this subject and listen to the birds. Of course there's other noises. It is Saturday and so we've got People cutting up bits of wood, hedging, mowing in the distance. It's going to happen, isn't it? Especially when you can't walk too far from home. I love scratching in. Okay, let's come in and do a little more on these trees. So I'm going to get my, just structure the tree trunk a bit. This feeling is coming out of the carpet of blue here. And again, you can see it's still wet. It's quite a cool day. So working on plein air, it can change very dramatically. If you're working on a hot day, everything's drying quicker, you've got to work a little faster if you want to do wet in wet techniques. It's still very wet today. It's quite dreamy. And of course, if I let this first layer dry, you can come in with some very much harder lines. Much more control if they're dry. So using a wet on dry technique. This one is very much a wet in wet technique. Mixing up some more paint, a bit more purple. Some of the purples are going to come up here so that you get some sort of continuity of colour. And you get the sort of flooding of the shadows of the boughs. And if it's a little overkill, you can always pull some out with the tissue paper. I've somewhat overdone it, so I'm going to come back in with my limey colours and make them smudge. So they cross over the trunk. If you really take another look, when you're out and about, look at the leaves, they cross over the trunk. Okay. Let's come in and do another tree. So they're going to go a little further away. So they're going to be a bit thinner, a bit less detailed. You can see them here and there as they disappear up behind the foreground trees. My dog's decided to dig for rabbits because she's a bit bored now. She loves doing that. Not that she ever catches any. Oops, that's a bit strong. Okay. So you can see that tree is a little bluer, a bit paler, a bit less detail, and so it tends to push it back. And smudge it again if it's too hard. It's all very swimmy at the moment. I don't mind that. It's just keeping some sort of control. It's not that easy, but we'll get there. So let's put a tree in here. I do tend to move the trees around a bit to suit the composition. You can't always be picky where you sit in the woods. But you just choose the trees you want. if you're having trouble making a composition. And sometimes trees come down because they've been coppiced and they've been split several times. And they grow about 3 trunks from the base, which this one has. This weather is fantastic, it's just the bees just love it. I can hear them. There's tree pollen, there's flower pollen, there's fruit pollen, all sorts of things going into making that honey. I look forward to harvesting mine later this year. Meanwhile, I've just got to stop them swarming, because I have a habit of doing that. The stick does lend itself to doing some lovely marks for the branches and the trees. I do love a stick. So we've got a little bit of a distance going on in the middle. Let's put another sapling here. That will help the composition. So again, you're thinking all the time how to sort of make the composition work. And I quite like that sort of bushy sapling. Again, I've got a lot of water pooling around the edge with the pigment on, so draw that off, because it's going to back run and make cauliflowers, because the centre of the paper will start drying before the edges, especially if they're flooded like this. So just police the edges, keep an eye what's going on in order to save yourself a lot of bother later. So that tree, that was coming down here, and there was another one slightly behind it, almost overlapping it. It's quite nice to put some darks in just under the boughs. This one goes up here and goes off to the right and comes down. So let's warm this trunk up a little bit more because it's further forward. I'm going to just bring in a little bit more magenta, and you can see that the 3 primary colours have given me some adequate browns, and because I haven't deviated and gone off and started using other browns in my palette, I've got much more continuity. And then this one, I think, let's put some branches that come right across. So I'm just going to extend this tree across the sight line. So it's not too predictable. I hope it isn't anyway. And then this comes across here. And a few up here. So hopefully you can see it coming together. Trees, the lungs of the earth, are just magic. Luckily I live on Leith Hill, so I am surrounded by beautiful trees, and of course the birds that live in them. bit of dark in the corner in a minute. Go off the page, you know, doesn't matter if your page isn't big enough, it's never big enough to take in a whole scene. So go off the page, you know, make the viewer feel there's other things beyond this picture in your scene. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush and bring a little more definition now to these boughs so that it just sort of smudges those marks that I've just put in for the sticks and branches. So we get a little bit of blurring going on and hopefully a bit of naturalness. Mainly have beech up here, but we do have oak, and the Forestry Commission sound busy today. If you can hear the chainsaw in the background, somebody's out there chopping up. Let's do a little bit more detail. So as it's going back, just see these trees coming into their own, and I'm going to leave it very out of focus at the back. The only problem I've got is that my white at the back will always leap forward. They will always want to leap forward and join the white at the front, so I need to keep that recession going on. So I'm going to come in, I might do another tree actually, one that's slightly twisted. As they do, they sort of lean over, try and gain the light that they can see through the canopy of other trees. There's a really good book called The Life of Trees. Very interesting. I can't remember the author offhand, but it talks about trees and how they behave together. Okay, a little bit dark, so just going to watch it for a bit. It might be fine because it's going to dry 30% lighter. And I'm just going to give it a few more twiggy bits. And it's going behind these big trees at the front. Let's put a branch coming across here. So let's define the path a little more while that's drying. You know, sometimes you find a little way through the bluebell woods. It's not a particularly defined path, but trodden by a few people, not too many. And it's really magical when you find that path. You think, oh, good. Let's try and tiptoe our way through the bluebells and see where the path goes, and just smell the bluebells. So it just make that path a little richer here. As it comes forward, a bit more magenta. You know, it could be slightly earthy where the bluebells have been trodden down a bit. I don't want a big path, I just want a discrete path that I've discovered. And I did this once. I found a discrete path that somebody, very few people, had obviously gone down at some point. And I had my puppy with me, and this chap came along with his dog, a very old dog, and my puppy got hugely excited. I was working on the ground, and the puppy threw up all sorts of crud and humus from the forest floor all across my painting. And this chap said, "Oh, that probably improved your painting." I said, "It probably did." Anyway, I finished my work, eventually he moved on. I eventually finished and walked back to the car. This is a few years ago now. And on my car was a post-it note on my windscreen, because I think I was the only other car in the car park. And this post-it note said, "If you're the lady that was painting the Bluebell woods, please, I might like to buy your painting. Please give me a call." So I gave him a call, and true enough, he bought the painting, and it was the guy who walked past me and commented on how the dog might have improved my work. So that was a really funny story, and I was more than happy, of course, because this chap knew the little path and it meant something to him, and that's what it's all about, really. Now, I've made a bit of a mess of this here, so let's try and recede what's behind it a bit without making that too dark. I don't want it too dark. So there's a lot of light going through here, and as I said, at the back we've got too much white, so I'm going to very gently tint this white down, lower its tone with a tiny bit of pale blue. You probably think I'm doing nothing, but it's just enough to tone that down and get some recession at the back. I do like the light coming through, so I'm going to leave that. I'm going to put some shadows in now. So I'm going to keep to the colour scheme, of course. Let's go for it. So let's go down and up the other side, and as it goes away, down and up the other side, up the other side, the other side, and it can flatten out. But clearly I've made a bit of a gully here, which and darker and richer with the shadows at the front. So bring those shadows to the fore, a little bit more open, less linear as they come forward, like that. And then of course this one would have a shadow, so obviously the sun's got to have some sort of continuity. So when you're sitting out on plein air, you'll find that the sun is obviously moving, or rather we're moving around the sun, and your shadows are changing all the time. So I tend to do it towards the end of the painting, like now. But the shadows at the back are too dark, so I'm going to lift them off a little with a damp brush and wiping it all the time. Don't like that. I don't want that shouting at me. I want that feeling of it all going backwards. Let's put a bit there. If you want to, you can put a couple of figures in. Let's put a bit more across there. I don't like what's happening here. Round there, that's it. And pockets of this are still wet. The line is too hard, so sometimes it's worth just stroking into that line, like that one. Let's create a few more strong bluebells at the front. Actually, I seem to have lost them. And just break up this line. Again, get my stick out and run the line. Just a little detail, not much. Otherwise I'll be for here forever. Let's put a bit more pink into some of them. Just to give you a sense of space. detail at the front, more out of focus towards the back. And a few lines. Of course you can make them more bell-light if you want to, but I'm just doing a very quick interpretation. Thank God for the Impressionist, that's all I can say. Okay. This is still a bit too hard, so I'm going to come in, just soften this off a bit. Shadow's a little harsh. Let's soften it off with a damp brush. Then the middle shadow seems to have disappeared a bit, so I'm just going to make that slightly stronger because I've lost a bit of the recession going on here. A little bit of dark coming in here. A few more leaves. Blur them off. Oh. The yellow here will just hold the foreground and marry. Just throw my brush away. Oops. That's it. And of course I've got a nice white patch in the corner here. Let's put a bit of yellow in. Sometimes that little bit of yellow would just hold the painting together, funny sort of way. There's another hard line. Let's do that. So a little bit of leaf definition, not much. We know they're there, your brain will do the rest. There's a bit of white here. Okay. And that's done. Thank you for watching.